August 15th, 1971, a Sunday evening. Across America, families gathered in living rooms to watch their president address the nation. Richard Nixon appeared on every television screen with an announcement that would quietly rewrite the rules of money itself. Yet the next morning, when the sun rose on August 16th, nothing appeared different. Store shelves were stocked. Paychecks cleared. Bills were paid. The world looked identical to the day before. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The operating system of global currency had been updated overnight, and almost no one noticed. This is the story of the most profound economic revolution in modern history, one that happened without riots, without visible chaos, without a single broken window. It's the story of how money stopped being a physical promise and became something else entirely. A collective agreement, a shared performance, a belief system that requires everyone to play along. The change was pragmatic, not sinister. It traded the rigidity of a system built on metal for the flexibility of one built on confidence. But that trade came with consequences that compound silently, year after year, touching every paycheck, every price tag, every dream deferred. Understanding this moment means understanding the invisible forces shaping your financial life right now. Before 1971, the world operated under a different logic. After the devastation of World War II, nations craved stability. They found it in a system called Bretton Woods, an elegant solution to global chaos. The United States dollar became the anchor, and the anchor was tied to something tangible: gold. Specifically, bars of gold locked in vaults, counted and verified. $35 could be exchanged for 1 ounce of physical metal. Every dollar in circulation represented a fragment of that finite stockpile. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar, which meant they were indirectly pegged to that same gold. It created a chain of trust extending from Fort Knox to every wallet on Earth. This wasn't just an economic mechanism, it was psychological. People understood it instinctively. Money was backed by something real, something you could touch, something that couldn't be created with a printing press. Scarcity was built into the system's foundation. That scarcity acted as a governor on ambition. A nation couldn't finance unlimited projects by simply issuing more currency. Its promises were constrained by the metal it possessed. Politicians had to choose: infrastructure or military spending, domestic programs or foreign commitments. The vault imposed discipline, but America's post-war vision was expansive. New highways carved through landscapes, suburbs bloomed, social programs launched, and overseas, troops were deployed to distant conflicts. Each commitment required dollars. Each dollar represented a claim on that gold reserve. The mathematics became impossible. The promise outgrew the physical reality backing it. By the late 1960s, other nations began testing whether America could honor its guarantee. They started exchanging their accumulated dollars for actual gold. The vault was being drained. Nixon's announcement severed the chain. The gold window closed. The dollar would no longer be convertible. The anchor was cut, and every currency on Earth suddenly floated free. Yet here's what makes this moment so remarkable. The performance continued without interruption. Think of it as a grand theatrical production, where the stagehands removed the entire backdrop during the second act, but the actors never broke character. The audience, absorbed in the story, never looked behind the curtain. On Monday morning, August 16th, workers clocked in. Paychecks were deposited. Mortgages were paid. Contracts were signed. The choreography of commerce remained flawless. Every transaction followed the same script it had the day before. The dollar bills in your wallet looked identical. They spent the same way at the grocery store. The price tags hadn't changed overnight. The machinery of the economy hummed along, drowning out the sound of the fundamental rule being rewritten. This is the essence of what economists call fiat currency, though that term doesn't capture the human reality. It's money by decree, yes, but more than that, it's money by collective performance. The bills have value because everyone agrees to treat them as valuable, because employers issue them as payment, because landlords accept them as rent, because the entire economic play requires them as props. The moment everyone agrees to continue their roles, the show goes on. The trust didn't disappear, it simply shifted. Before, Trust rested on something external and verifiable, metal in a vault. Now, trust rested on the credibility of the institution itself, the government's authority, the central bank's management, the shared belief that tomorrow, these pieces of paper will still be accepted as payment. It's a social contract maintained by momentum and necessity. This isn't the first time a society discovered that money can exist purely as belief. History offers stark reminders of how fragile that foundation can be. Consider France in the early 1700s. The nation was drowning in debt from decades of war. Then arrived John Law, a charismatic Scottish financier with a revolutionary idea. He convinced the French government to establish a central bank that could issue paper money backed not by gold, but by shares in his company, the Mississippi Company, which held rights to develop the vast, unexplored territories of Louisiana. The promise was intoxicating. Untold riches from a new world frontier. Wealth beyond measure waiting to be claimed. Paris transformed into a frenzy of speculation. Aristocrats and commoners alike traded their gold and silver for paper shares, certain they were securing their fortunes. The printing presses ran day and night, creating more notes to meet insatiable demand. Wealth appeared to multiply overnight. Grand estates were purchased. Lavish parties celebrated the new prosperity. For a brief, dazzling moment, France believed it had solved the ancient problem of scarcity. Then, reality arrived from Louisiana. The reports were devastating. There were no gold mines, no mountains of treasure, just wilderness, swamps, and a handful of struggling settlements. The belief shattered like glass. Overnight, the paper that had bought mansions became worthless. Fortunes evaporated. Riots erupted. The system collapsed so completely that France wouldn't fully trust paper money again for generations. Or, look further back to 1700 Sweden. A banker named Palmstruck convinced his government to let him issue Europe's first banknotes. They were a marvel of convenience, easier to carry than heavy coins, simple to count, elegant in their efficiency. But Palmstruck discovered what every issuer of paper money eventually learns. The temptation to print more than you can back is overwhelming. He issued credit far beyond his reserves. When depositors demanded their metal, the bank couldn't deliver. Europe's first government bailout followed, and with it, the first modern lesson that paper promises are easier to make than keep. These weren't primitive societies falling for crude deceptions. These were sophisticated economies led by educated people who believed they had transcended the limitations of physical money. They learned that belief, no matter how widespread, can evaporate faster than morning fog. The collapse of Bretton Woods wasn't just an American decision. It was a blueprint that rippled outward, reshaping every currency on Earth. When the dollar severed its link to gold, every other nation that had pegged its currency to the dollar was suddenly adrift. The anchor was gone. Within months, the world's major economies made a collective choice. They would all float together. Floating exchange rates became the new normal. Currencies now moved against each other in a constant dance, their values determined by markets, by trade flows, by perception and confidence. There was no external reference point anymore, no metal standard acting as true north. Each currency's value was measured only in relation to other currencies, which were themselves measured in relation to others. It was a hall of mirrors where every reflection depended on the reflections around it. This shift granted governments a power they had never possessed before. The logic of the vault, with its physical constraints and mathematical limits, gave way to the art of monetary policy. Central bankers became the new architects of economic reality. They could expand the money supply to stimulate growth, contract it to cool inflation, adjust interest rates to guide behavior. The science of economics replaced the simplicity of counting gold bars. Think of the global financial system now as an enormous, intricate mobile hanging from a ceiling. Each piece represents a currency, a bond market, a national economy. They're all connected by invisible wires, perfectly balanced through complex forces. When one piece shifts, the whole structure adjusts. But look closer. What is this entire, elaborate construction hanging from? A single thread. And that thread is made of nothing but confidence. The collective belief that tomorrow, the system will still function, that the paper will still be accepted, that the performance will continue. This is neither inherently good nor evil. It's simply the architecture we inhabit. But architecture shapes behavior. And this particular design created incentives that transformed the entire economy. A system running on fiat currency operates like an acceleration engine that cannot be turned off. Here's why. Money is created primarily through lending. When a bank issues a loan, new money enters circulation. That money comes with a cost, interest. To pay back both principal and interest, more economic activity must occur. More goods must be sold. More services rendered. More money must be created through more lending. Growth isn't optional. It's a mathematical requirement built into the foundation. This creates a powerful, perpetual bias toward expansion and consumption. Saving loses its advantage because the yardstick itself shrinks over time. The rational choice shifts toward borrowing and spending now, rather than accumulating for later. The system rewards debt and punishes patience. Watch what happens during a recession. Economic activity slows. Loans default. Money supply contracts. But the system can't tolerate prolonged contraction because the debt burden remains while the means to service it disappears. So, central banks intervene. Interest rates drop to historic lows. New programs inject liquidity. Quantitative easing expands the money supply directly. The explicit goal is to reignite borrowing and spending, to restart the acceleration engine. This isn't a conspiracy. It's not corrupt officials deliberately undermining prosperity. It's the logical operation of a system designed to prevent deflation and encourage activity. Recessions become opportunities for policy intervention. Each crisis provides justification for expanding the monetary base, ensuring the cycle continues. What we celebrate as economic growth is often something more ambiguous. When the money supply expands faster than the production of actual goods and services, we see rising prices and rising wages. Numbers get bigger. But has genuine prosperity increased? Or have we simply changed the units of measurement? $1 million means something very different today than it did in 1971, not because dollars became more valuable, but because far more of them exist. The deepest cost of this system is invisible to most people living through it. It's the distortion of measurement itself. Imagine trying to build a house with a yardstick that shrinks a little bit each day. You measure the lumber, cut the pieces, assemble the frame. But the yardstick you used yesterday measures less today. The structure never quite fits together the way you planned. This is the silent theft of inflation. You work the same hours. You bring home a paycheck with bigger numbers on it. But those numbers purchase less of the world each year. The yardstick shrinks. Your effort remains constant, but the unit measuring that effort diminishes. Housing that your parents could afford on a single income now requires two. Education that was once accessible becomes a lifetime of debt. Healthcare that was manageable becomes a source of bankruptcy. People describe it as feeling stuck on a treadmill, and the metaphor is precise. You're running, you're working, you're advancing in your career. The speedometer shows progress, higher salary, better title, more responsibility. But the scenery outside never seems to change. You're no closer to the financial security your parents achieved at the same age. The treadmill's speed increased to match your pace. This explains phenomena we often blame on personal failure or generational weakness. The two-income trap isn't about families choosing luxury over time with children. It's an adaptation to a system where one income can no longer cover what it once did. The explosion of personal debt isn't about irresponsible spending. It's a rational response to a system that punishes saving and makes borrowing the only path to major purchases. Young couples scroll through real estate listings, watching homes climb further out of reach each month. Students sign loan documents for education costs that bear no relationship to future earning potential. Families fill grocery carts and watch the total creep higher for the same items they bought last year. These aren't disconnected problems. They're symptoms of the same underlying condition. The measuring tool itself has been compromised. The system doesn't announce this cost. There's no alarm bell when your purchasing power erodes. It happens gradually, year by year, camouflaged by rising nominal wages that feel like progress. Only when you step back and compare across decades does the pattern become clear. But what happens when the performance itself begins to falter? When the collective agreement shows cracks? Greece, 2011. A modern European nation, part of a sophisticated currency union, suddenly discovered the limits of borrowed prosperity. For years, the country had spent beyond its means. financed by debt that seemed endless. Then, the mathematics caught up. Creditors demanded payment. The government couldn't print its way out, because it didn't control its own currency. Austerity measures followed. Pensions were slashed. Public services collapsed. Citizens who had planned retirements found their savings trapped in banks, accessible only in limited daily withdrawals. The streets of Athens filled with protesters. Not revolutionaries or extremists, but teachers, engineers, retirees. Ordinary people who had followed the rules and discovered the rules could be changed retroactively. The European Union and international banks restructured the debt to save the system, but the cost was borne by those who had the least say in creating the problem. Lebanon, 2019. A more recent and more complete collapse. A country with an educated population, a vibrant culture, a history of commerce and banking. Then, the financial system simply stopped. Banks froze accounts. The currency lost 90% of its value within months. Life savings became worthless. Businesses shuttered. A middle class built over generations evaporated. Lines stretched outside banks as people tried to withdraw their own money, only to be turned away. Luxury stores in Beirut that once catered to wealthy tourists stood abandoned. The social contract shattered so completely that basic trust disappeared. When money stops working, everything built on top of it crumbles. These aren't ancient histories or distant warnings. These are contemporary examples of what happens when the performance ends. The lights haven't gone out. The performance continues across most of the world, maintained by institutions powerful enough and credible enough to sustain belief. But watching Greece and Lebanon teaches a crucial lesson. The system isn't invincible. It's sustained by confidence, and confidence can break. So what does this knowledge offer you? Not paranoia, not a prediction of imminent collapse, something more valuable. The ability to read the script while the play is still running. Understanding this history doesn't require you to reject modern currency or abandon the financial system. That would be impractical and unnecessary, but it does transform your relationship with it. You stop being a passive participant and become an informed observer. You recognize the incentives built into the architecture. You see why certain outcomes repeat across centuries. You understand that the rules governing your financial life were designed with specific purposes, and those purposes may not align perfectly with your long-term interests. This awareness becomes its own form of wealth. It guides decisions about debt and saving. It provides context for economic news that otherwise sounds like random chaos. It reveals why certain assets preserve value across time, while others evaporate. The ultimate hedge against uncertainty isn't found in any particular investment. It's found in understanding how the game is structured. You can't stop the performance. You can't rewrite the script. But you can learn to distinguish between the painted backdrop and the reality behind it. You can recognize when the yardstick is shrinking and adjust your measurements accordingly. You can plan for a future where the rules might change again, because history shows they always do. August 15, 1971, wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of the world we inhabit now, a world where money flows like water, expanding and contracting according to policy decisions made in distant offices, where prosperity can be genuine or illusory, depending on whether wealth is growing faster than the units measuring it. The performance continues. The lights remain bright. The actors know their lines perfectly, but now you understand it's a performance. You see the stage for what it is, and that clarity, that ability to perceive the difference between the show and the machinery running it, is the only wealth that can't be inflated away.